Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. The 2040 offseason is underway today. Was an incredible regular season for the Buffalo Wings with a 118-44 record. Unfortunately, we were defeated by the Dodgers 3-2 in the NLDS. So that great regular season really didn't mean all that much when all was said and done. Looking forward to this offseason, we do have some money to spend, and the fact that we've got so much money to potentially spend this offseason was driven by two main things. One is that Daniel Meza, who was a rental for us last year, and Steve Anderson, who's come up through our system, are both free agents. Meza and Anderson both looking for $20 million plus a year, so we don't intend to bring them back. And we're also going to be moving on from Derek Bentley. Picked him up the middle of last year to be a utility infielder for us, but at the age of 34, he's looking for about $16 million as a free agent as well. So we're clearing some money off the books with some big contracts, particularly Meza and Anderson moving on. And then we also traded away our longtime player, two-way player, Juan Estrada, a good solid starting pitcher, and a good, solid number 2 hitting outfielder who's pretty good at getting on base and drawing walks. He was due to make $26 million this upcoming year if we exercised his option. We felt like with the departures of Meza and Anderson and the way this team has been built these last several years with excellent pitching and hitting that has not always come through in the playoffs, adding a potentially big bat was the way to go. And moving on from Estrada, believe gives us the best opportunity to do that via free agency this upcoming offseason. It's been helpful to hear the opinions of the commenters on both of these moves in the comments to our last episode, and quite honestly, even leading up to these last couple episodes with some of the decisions we've been going back and forth on. With Estrada, I'd say the most frequent or loud or common criticism of that is that we should have kept him on board, given him the qualifying offer that he wouldn't accept to get the likely supplemental first-round draft pick when he moved on, because the options for us in the trade market were not incredibly compelling. I get that to an extent, but honestly, I'm pretty happy with Jim Andrews, the guy that we ended up getting back in trade for him, as we talked about. No questions about his defense and his ability to play multiple positions in the infield. If the bat develops a bit further, I think he's a pretty useful overall player, kind of an average to slightly above average offensive profile with a pretty good defensive profile. He is a guy who was a former first-round pick, so I don't know that we'd be getting the same type of talent as Andrews with a pick in the 35 to 40 range as a supplemental pick. And he's also someone who can help us right now at the age of 25 years old, not making a lot of money, can help this major league team right now, and we are a win-now team. So a supplemental pick for Estrada, I agree, probably would have been more attractive than the kind of relievers that we were being offered for him, but being able to structure a deal where we gave up an outfield prospect that was not particularly important to us in addition to Estrada, and got Andrews, who can definitely help us now and hopefully get a little better in return, was a move that I was willing to make. And I've also gotten some feedback that Daniel Rojas is not really the right guy to try to build around in free agency. I get that Rojas is not a perfect answer, as we talked about an episode or two ago, when you look at players who are well above average in contact, home run power, and eye. There's less than 10 of them in baseball. Rojas is the only one who's a free agent, and the price in terms of prospects and or really good major league players that it was going to take to get the other players of a similar stature was just exorbitant as far as I'm concerned. As I've talked about in previous episodes in the comments, if Rojas hits free agency and if he's insistent on getting 5-6 years without any outs for the team, I think we may have to move on from him. I don't love that he's in his mid-30s. I do like that he's an Iron Man. And he's been very productive last year. Last year with that 160 WRC plus and leading the league in on-base percentage is arguably the greatest season of his career. So there's an argument that we're buying high, picking up a guy right off of the best year of his career, which I get. There's also making a medium to long-term commitment potentially to a guy in his mid-30s, which I get. But Rojas has a 135 WRC plus, and you look at the 3 years before this great season that he just had, and he had a 130, 128, 140 WRC plus. Not necessarily expecting him to duplicate the season he had a year ago if we pick him up, but if this is a guy who puts up a 125 WRC plus for us for the next 3 years or so, I think he could be a pretty big asset in our lineup. I don't want to end up giving him a ton of years, so there is a risk. We've opened up this money to target on Rojas if he's re-signed before free agency, or if he's insistent on 7 years at $32 million a year and he won't budge off of that. We're going to have a lot of money to spend and not a perfect backup plan. I'd say right now my backup plan probably is Colton Sims, another free agent. He's a guy we've tried to trade for at times over the past few seasons when we've been looking for a little boost near the All-Star break. He's typically had no trade clauses and been unwilling to join us. I think years ago we also looked at him in free agency. He's older than Rojas at 37 years old. He's a left-handed hitter rather than a right-handed hitter. Still put up a 136 WRC plus last year, and over the course of his career, he's at 125. He's put up some big years, 449 homers, almost 1,300 ribbies with a 271 average. He could definitely help us. I think he is someone who will be looking for not just less money than Rojas, but fewer years as well. Now, granted, he's also 37 years old, so that only makes sense. When you look at his ratings, he's not quite the hitter that Rojas is at this point. But given that we don't like the options on the trade market, not that any of these top hitters are really on the trade block, but just in terms of approaching their teams to try to get them, as I said, the prices are ridiculous. Sims is probably the backup plan. I think there's a chance that we could get Sims for a 3-year contract with team options for the second and third year, so essentially just making a 1-year commitment to him. He can play first. He can play third, although with that 35 range at this point, probably wouldn't want him to be there. Could certainly end up a DH for us as well. Not a perfect fallback plan. Another guy who's older, another guy who's likely to be declining. But if things don't work out with Rojas, I'd say Sims is an option. If things fall apart with both of those players, honestly, at that point, Meza or a Steve Anderson could be in the mix to try to return. We'd also revisit the trade market at that point. I don't know that there's going to be a price that we're willing to pay for the type of bat that we'd be looking for. Running it back with the likes of Meza and Anderson rather than someone who's a more dynamic offensive threat like Rojas or Sims would not be optimal, but it may be the path that we have to go down. And after we get through award season, we'll kind of get to the early stages of free agency and figure out what may materialize on that front. We ended up this year making offers to all of our arbitration eligible players, and you can see here we've got about a dozen guys eligible for arbitration. kind of a unique situation where we're not looking to cut bait with any of them. The guy I was most torn about, given the number of good outfielders we have coming up through our organization, is Mike Broughton, right fielder who we brought up 3 years ago in a trade with the Angels. Like his defense, and he's a left-handed hitter. His batting ratings in general suggest a bit above average offensive player. When you look at how good he is against right-handed pitching, though, feel like he could be a pretty useful player, 75-80% of the time that we are facing off against right-handed pitching. Didn't really see that over the course of his time with us. You can see in his 3 years with Buffalo right now, he's put up a 94 WRC plus overall, is coming off of his best year in a Buffalo uniform. And when we look at him versus right-handed pitching, that 97 WRC plus is a little better than what he's done overall. I think even at the $5.5 million range, which is what we'll need to be paying him for this upcoming season, it's not enough money that it's going to put a huge dent in our budget, and it's also not enough money given his pretty strong defensive profile and an offensive profile that still looks interesting, that we wouldn't be able to trade him to get that salary off the books a couple months from now if we decide to go with a bit of a youth movement. So there was a thought to just move on from him. But I feel like even if we make the arbitration offer to him and then, as I said, decide 2 or 3 months from now that the way this roster is looking with some of the young players, Broughton's probably not going to make the team, I think we'll be able to get him off the books without much pain and perhaps even get a decent player in return. Mentioned that Anderson, Meza, and Bentley are the 3 guys that we're losing to free agency this year. Bentley, as I mentioned, looking for around $16 million a year for 5 years. 34-year-old who was in a more utility role for us last year. Can't justify that kind of money. Meza was solid for us. He was a 1-year rental, looking for $21.7 million a year over 6 years. So we are going to submit a QO to Meza, hoping that neither of these guys are going to accept these qualifying offers, because we do want to use that money ultimately on Rojas or somebody else, as outlined earlier, but think that the draft pick compensation that we'll potentially get is worthwhile putting a QO out there. Steve Anderson, as we talked about, also looking for pretty big money, $19.5 million over 8 years. I think there's some probability he'd accept this, given that it's a $18.9 million QO. Again, I don't think it's the end of the world if he does, because I think we'd be able to trade him away at that number if we needed to and we decided that Rojas was the way to go. So we are going to, I don't even know if calling it rolling the dice with these QOs is probably overestimating the risk involved of either of these guys accepting, but we're putting both of the QOs out there. If they are accepted, probably means we need to adapt our plan a little bit, most likely by trading away the player who accepted the qualifying offer. Hopefully, as it'll turn out that neither of them accept it, and we'll get some potential draft pick compensation. And as I said, there is a scenario if things do not work out with the likes of Mr. Rojas and Mr. Sims, that we could end up pivoting back to an Anderson and or a Meza in the offseason. Certainly not my first option, since, as I talked about, would like a more accomplished bat than either of those 2 gentlemen to be added to the team. But we'll have to be flexible as we get into the early stages of free agency and get some more information over the next few weeks. And we've received an interesting trade offer here in the early stages of the offseason. Roman Maples, you may remember him. He was a guy who was picked 8th overall back in 2027. We had the 2nd pick in the draft that year in the very early stages of this playthrough. and we went with Ali Ostendorf, the starting pitcher, instead. We followed Maples over the course of his career, and you see he's a 3-time Silver Slugger, 3-time All-Star, and a 1-time Gold Glove winner. So he's been a good shortstop for Kansas City. Still excellent defensively. The bat is not what it once was, and he's fragile in terms of his injury proneness. Also 32 years old at this point. Looking at the last few years, he's been a below average offensive player slightly each of the last couple years. And he's also set to make $24 million a year for these next 3 seasons. That said, he's still intriguing because of the glove with a competent bat. But they're looking for Nate Ruckel, our excellent stopper who's led the league in games, in holds, his 2 years with our team. Think that he will probably get some votes for the Mariano Rivera Award in the National League this year. If we were able to get the Royals to keep a ton of Maples' contract, he is a guy that I'd certainly consider adding down the line over the next couple of months. He could be a fallback option, again, if things don't work out with the free agents that I've mentioned and there's not a lot on the trade market. Maples certainly would allow us to tighten up our defense at shortstop and give us a competent major league bat. But I would have to think that I would want the Royals to retain a pretty good chunk of that $24+ million a year for the next 3 seasons if we were to bring him on board, kind of heading into his mid-30s with a fragile disposition physically and a very average-ish offensive player the last couple years. $24 million for a well above average shortstop glove, but not an perennial Gold Glove type glove, seems like a bit much for me for this Buffalo team to be paying. And one thing that I touched upon a couple of episodes ago when I was going through the end of season news that have to address, we just hired Nohemar Renjifo to be our manager in Marathon Class A team. He's outstanding with development mechanics and legendary in handling aging. Not that that's a huge issue for the likely early 20-year-olds that he's going to most likely be dealing with in single A ball. But the reason we needed to bring on a new manager in Marathon is that after the retirement of our, I don't want to say long time, but our medium-term manager who had been with us about 6 years ever since I gave up the reins of being both general manager and manager. We had a hole there, and we promoted Brian Hickman all the way from being our single A manager, where he's been for most of the last decade. You can see he's a lot of success down there, making the playoffs 7 out of 8 years. And he was looking for a promotion, and we promoted him all the way to be our major league manager. He's outstanding with development, excellent with mechanics and aging. Importantly, we felt like he was going to have good relationships with our Buffalo Wings players, and his personality also fit well with the rest of the team that we have here on staff at the major league level. You can see we've got a very cohesive group right now, a lot of personalities that work well together, and no conflicts at all among our team. So felt like Hickman was a good fit for us for the next few years. 62 years old, so not sure how long he'll be around. You can see he's still making the $125,000 that he was making down as a single A manager. So he's going to be a bit of a bargain for us the next couple years in terms of a major league manager. And we'll get 2 years to see what he can do with our team, and then potentially have to pay more for him, or who knows, he might even retire by that point, in which case we'll be making another managerial decision going forward. And we've started to get a lot of our minor league free agents as well as our arbitration eligible players signed. Catcher Mitch Houlihan recovering from that injury that cost him the last few months of last year back. Fans pleased with that. Fans pleased that Damari Hainsworth will be back. Tegan Tiley and Luis Comaduran will be back. Alexis Mendoza back, which the fans are pleased with. David Espinoza back. The fans also pleased with that. And the reliever Mike Waters, as well as the outfielder we talked about, Mike Broaden, back. The fans like Broaden being back. So a lot of progress there. Still down to our closer, Joe Scott, the excellent young left fielder, Juan Romero, and Ben Elmquist, who's certainly in the mix to potentially be a center fielder or more likely a fourth or fifth outfielder for us next year. Only waiting to hear on those three players. And at this point, our fan interest was 100 before we got little bitty bumps, it sounded like, from several of those signings. But hopefully we'll have a little bit of insulation in terms of the fan interest in our team for the inevitable departures of Meza, Anderson, and Bentley, some of which the fans probably won't be too happy about. And a couple more arbitration-eligible players re-signed. Juan Romero, an important member of our offense, and then Joe Scott, our excellent closer. Both will be back with us next year as well. So at this point, we're just waiting on Elmquist. And then we'll be in award season starting today. So I guess that means we didn't get any Gold Glove winners, I don't believe, because I don't think we got a special note on that. We've had a pretty decent overall defense the last few years. A lot of good defensive players and very few poor defensive players, but haven't really had any or very many of the exceptional defensive players who are regular Gold Glove winners, at least over the last 5 or 6 seasons. And we have gotten Ben Elmquist signed now, so the large crop of arbitration-eligible players have all re-signed with us, and that actually has opened up a little bit of money for us since we've generally signed them for a bit less than their default arbitration numbers were. If you were looking closely, you can see the Mariano Rivera Award has been passed out, and Joe Scott, the young reliever, I guess he's not that young anymore, he's going to be 26 in less than a month, won the Mariano Rivera Award for the second time in the past 3 years. He has been excellent when healthy in the 3 years since we brought him over with that trade with San Diego to really try to stabilize our closer position. You look at the guys that we gave up for him and feel pretty good about what we did. Alex Fellers, a right fielder, spent last year in AAA. Darnell Polite, a solid reliever, 10-7. He did have 38 saves for them this year with a 3.50 ERA, but he's older and more expensive than Scott and not as good. Mike Coleman, a starting pitching prospect who doesn't look like he's going to be very much. And then Alan McGraw, who's kind of a veteran infielder, unlikely to make a big impact at the major league level. So that was a trade that I think has worked out pretty well for us, even though that we did have to trade a little bit of money, or we got a little bit of money in return. So that makes it even slightly better. But feel like we certainly got the best player in that deal in Joe Scott. And as I mentioned, he has really stabilized that closer role for us. Our excellent stopper, Nate Ruckel, finished third in the voting. Figured he would get some votes. And then David Espinoza, 8-0 with a 1.92 ERA over 89 innings pitched, also got some votes for us this year. That bullpen of ours was excellent. Espinoza is a guy who, with his profile, would probably be a starter in most teams, a controllable 27-year-old. He is finally arbitration eligible. You can see we're going to be paying him $2.85 million next year. But a left-handed arm with a good solid profile who has, over the course of parts of 4 seasons in the majors, put up a 2.57 ERA, working primarily out of the bullpen. our pitching staff is so deep, and even after moving on from Estrada, Espinoza is probably more of a guy who we would have start a few games in a pinch if we have some injuries, like we did with Espinoza last year when Estrada coincidentally was hurt, but probably never going to get a chance as long as he's with Buffalo to be an every 5-day member of the starting rotation for an extended period of time. And I mentioned earlier that our longtime skipper had retired, but Alan Bowles once again named the National League Manager of the Year after that 118-win season. Bowles did a nice job for us. He was the bench coach in 2034 for our first World Series title after we promoted him from our high A ball in Jamestown, a high A ball club in Jamestown. He was the manager for our second World Series title in 2036 in his first year as manager after I resigned my managerial duties. And obviously he guided us to the playoffs every year after that. And he won the Manager of the Year award at the major league level 4 times in his 5 seasons before he retired at the age of 67. And we've made it to the big awards, so a relatively quiet awards season for the Buffalo Wings. You would think with a 118-win team, you'd have a Silver Slugger or a Gold Glove Award winner, and we had neither. Manager of the Year and the Mariano Rivera Award winner that were given to Bowles and Scott, respectively, were the only awards for us. On the American League, Andres Partida of the Baltimore Orioles, a unanimous Cy Young Award winner, 21-8 with 331 strikeouts and a ridiculous 1.95 ERA. Won the pitching Triple Crown, not surprisingly, led the American League with a 7.9 WAR as a pitcher. Over in the National League, more of a split vote. Harlan Campeau, last year's big free agent signing, who we went up against in the playoffs with the Dodgers, did get 9 first-place votes. But Amari Mohead of the Philadelphia Phillies, 32-year-old, first-time All-Star and first-time Cy Young Award winner this year at the age of 32, 17-7 with a league-best 2.64 ERA for Philadelphia. Looking at our team, our number 5 starter, Eric Barbarito, got some votes after his really nice year, 14-3 with a 2.72 ERA. He'll likely be our 3rd or 4th starter this upcoming year with the departure of Estrada. And then Joe Scott, our excellent closer, who, as I mentioned, did win the Mariano Rivera Award, also got some support in the form of one, I believe, 5th place vote for the 2040 Cy Young Award here in the National League. Moving on to the MVP award, very split vote in the American League. Chad Ferrigno of the Guardians, first baseman, who led the league with 130 ribbies and also hit .312 with 46 homers to put up a league best 167 WRC plus, wins the MVP award. You can see Daniel Correjo of the Mariners, a second baseman, Mike Allen, right fielder from the Guardians, and Andres Partida, the Cy Young Award winner for the Orioles, also received first place votes. Daniel Rojas, who we've talked about as a potential free agency target, also received some votes in the American League race for most valuable player. National League, it's one of our divisional rivals, Irving Barunda of the Expos, excellent young player, one of the top hitters in baseball. When I've talked about looking at players in trade, Barunda, who is now a 2-time most valuable player at the age of 26, is one of those guys that I've been looking at. Not surprisingly, the price to pick him up is literally something like the top 3 prospects in our system, 2 great starting pitchers, and a good outfielder, and they'll start thinking about talking to us. He led the National League with a .332 batting average this year. Also led the league in on-base percentage, OPS, WRC plus, and WAR, while hitting 38 homers and driving in 110 runs. So an excellent season for Mr. Barunda. Looking at the rest of the MVP voting, and we did get a little support at the end. Seifu, our longtime second baseman / third baseman, and Eric Barbarito, who, as we talked about, got some Cy Young Award votes, were the only Buffalo Wings who got any attention to be named the National League MVP. So a bit surprising that a 118 win club doesn't go away with more regular season hardware. But it is what it is. It's all about winning the World Series, and we didn't achieve that. Would have been nice to maybe get a couple awards as consolation prizes, but that's really all they are when you're a win-now team. Colton Sims, who we talked about, is a potential fallback for us on the free agent market if we're unable to get a deal with Rojas. Looks like he finished 8th in the voting for National League MVP, and our former player Bobby Volig finished 6th in the voting for the Rockies this year. And not really surprisingly, both Steve Anderson and Daniel Meza declined our qualifying offers and headed to free agency. Figured that would ultimately be the case, and as I talked about earlier, if either of them had agreed to come back for us at that $18.9 million for a year, feel like we could definitely have gotten something in return if we traded those players away. So now it's just a matter of clicking to tomorrow and finding out whether or not Mr. Rojas is actually going to be a free agent or not. And before we check on the major league free agents, the international free agent list is a little longer than normal this year. Don't know if there's going to be anyone real interesting. Starting pitching, Alvaro de los Rios. He could be a number 5 starter. I wouldn't love him in that role, given the low movement he has. That said, our scouting accuracy on him is low, and he does throw in the triple digits. So not a completely uninteresting prospect, and doesn't look like he's looking for any incredible money. So we'll certainly go ahead and request a scouting report on him. Jesus Fontanez, another Cuban player. He looks pretty interesting. Now he's looking for about $15 million a year. We don't need any pitching help. De los Rios, a little bit younger, only looking for a little over $1 million. The type of guy that we wouldn't mind bringing into our organization. We will still scout Fontanez, but I think it's unlikely that we'll seriously pursue him. Center fielder Nobuo Hata out of Japan. Really good defensively, has some decent speed. Don't think he's really got a major league bat. We don't need a lot of help in the outfield. He's almost 28 years old. Does have some positive personality traits, and looks like conceptually he might not even be looking for a major league contract. So we'll certainly scout him and consider maybe bringing him on board as some organizational depth. But doesn't seem like there's any players who are going to be huge targets for us in international free agency this year. Looking at the rest of the free agents, you can see a lot of familiar names on the list. Steve Anderson and Daniel Meza from our team, Andres Medina, who used to be on our team, and Daniel Rojas did make it to free agency. We'll take a look at the rest of the class now. Colton Sims is not listed here. Would hope that he made it also, since we're thinking about him as our potential backup plan, and it does look like he did make it to free agency along with Michael Harris II, Tadayuki Segayuchi, a lot of familiar names who have in many cases kind of been pretty prominent players in this playthrough since it began. Anderson and Bentley, our guys are out there. Jimmy Burns, Dylan Cruz could be potential fallback options for us if we need a bat. Our old buddy Tim Hull, Andres Medina looking for pretty good money, Meza, who we've already talked about, Campbell Smithwick, a guy that we've looked at times in the past. So there are certainly offensive players who could help us that are out there. That said, Rojas is the strongest bat out there. Says he's looking for $32.8 million. As we've been talking about for several episodes now, both in the episodes and in our interaction with our loyal viewers in the comments, my concern with Rojas is just the length of the contract that he's going to be looking for. I know he's going to cost us a lot of money, but he's an Iron Man. Although he's in his mid-30s, he's coming off the best season of his career. We've got great scouting. We've got very high scouting accuracy, and his ratings and his performance last year tell us he's still a pretty dynamic offensive player. I just don't know that I want to make a 5 or 6 year commitment to him, and I tend to think that that's what Rojas is going to be looking for. We'll check in on Sims, our backup plan, first. As I said, my thought is Sims could very well be someone who could only be a 3-year contract. He says he's looking for 5 years at almost $26 million a year with a player option for his age 41 season and a no trade clause. Those are not terms that I would ever agree to with Sims. Tend to think we could probably get him for less money and fewer years and somewhat better optionality if we wanted to. The question is how crazy are Rojas demands going to be in terms of the years. And he's actually only looking for 5 years. Now, he does want a no-trade clause. He's not even bringing up any optionality in that 5th year of the contract. So there's probably some middle ground that we're going to be able to get to here. I'm going to go back to him without a no-trade clause and with less money and with fewer years and with some team optionality. I don't think he's going to let us win on all 4 of those fronts. But I'm glad to see he's not looking for a 6 or a 7 year contract, particularly with the fact that Colton Sims, who is more than 3 years older than him, is looking for a 5-year contract. I thought there was a decent chance that Rojas would be looking for at least 6 years. But we may be able to structure something that works for us and works for him based on his initial demands. And we're going to come back at Rojas pretty aggressively. As we talked about, he was looking for 5 years, $33 million a year, and a no-trade clause. We're coming back at him 3 years, an average of $28 million a year, team options for the 2nd and 3rd season, and we've thrown out the no-trade clause. So this was kind of the type of dream contract in my mind that conceptually we might be able to sign Rojas to. I don't think there's any way he goes for this. I think he's probably going to balk at the length of the contract, probably going to balk at the dollars, possibly going to balk at the no trade clause, and he probably won't like the team options. I think I'm most willing, if he comes back and we haven't completely offended him and he's willing to continue negotiating, if we're able to structure a deal with team options in the 2nd and 3rd seasons, or potentially more realistically the 3rd and 4th seasons, I wouldn't necessarily hate giving him, I wouldn't love giving him a no-trade clause, but I'd be willing to do it simply because the team options would kind of give us outs, and we're only making a year-to-year commitment with him anyways. So I think the key things that I'd probably be willing to increase when he comes back to us, I'd be willing to offer him more money and probably willing to include a no-trade clause if we could keep the team options in and keep the years at 3 or at the most, hopefully 4. But we'll see how he reacts to this, not anticipating it's something he's going to take back and think about with his family. Yeah, he definitely wants the no-trade clause, and you can see he wants 5 years still. He came down a little bit on the money. So I think if we come up on the money, we include the no trade clause. We'll see if maybe we can get him at 3 years with some team options. Realistically, we're probably going to need to go to 4 years with him to get this done. So we're kind of doing what I outlined. We've increased our average to $30 million a year from $28 million a year, and we've added in the no trade clause that he wanted. But for the time being, we've kept it at 3 years with team options after the first and second seasons. To me, that insulates us a little bit from the no trade clause because we've gotten out after each season. Don't think that this will get us done, but think it hopefully will move us closer. All right, so we're making some progress here. He's down to 4 years. He's cut the number he's looking for by about $1 million a season at this point. Still wants the no trade clause. I think I'll come back to him with 4 years, similar money. I don't think he's going to love the team options, but at this point, we'll have moved back by including the no trade clause. We'll be getting him close to the money that he wants, and we're kind of meeting in middle ground at 4 years instead of the 5 he wanted or the 3 we wanted originally. So it's just a question of how objectionable those team options are viewed by Twinkle Toes Rojas and his agent. And we're really only changing one thing in our response to him. He wanted 4 years with an average of $31.2 million and a no trade clause. We're giving him 4 years, an average of $31.2 million with the no trade clause. It's just that we've got the team options for seasons 3 and 4 built into this to protect us if he does age more rapidly than anticipated, and or we decide there's a more interesting option than him available in the free agent market 2 or 3 years from now. So we're giving him the money he just asked for. We're giving him the years he just asked for. We're giving him the no trade clause he just asked for. A good sense of how objectionable he views those team options as being. And he doesn't like them. He's willing to come down in the money actually at this point to avoid those team options. So at this point, I think I'm probably going to have to relent a little bit on the 3rd year team option and see if perhaps we can at least get the 4th year team option to just make this a guaranteed $3 million contract. And I think that's what we're going to do, simply giving him the $30.8 million a year over 4 years he just asked for, going back to him, and the only change that we're making is putting a team option on that final season of the contract. He won't relent on that 4th year. The nice thing is that he does keep coming down in the dollars that he's looking for. I guess what I'm going to do now is go back to him rather than the 4 years guaranteed. If he's insistent that that team option not be in there and the no trade clause not be in there, try him at 3 years, $30 million a season with no team options in the no trade clause. We don't have the optionality we're looking for, but if he won't give us the team option for that 4th season, why don't we just agree ahead of time that this is only a 3-year commitment, $30 million a year. And he really wants 4 years. So this is the decision I kind of felt that we might end up in. I really wanted 3 years. There was no way I was going to go 5 or 6 years. 4 years is definitely the middle ground on this. He's a very good offensive player right now. coming off of the best year of his career. And he's a guy who certainly can help the middle of our lineup with this batting profile. I do like that he's an Iron Man. I do like he's got the high work ethic. He's a guy who's actually won a Gold Glove once and a Silver Slugger, not a Silver Slugger. He was a Gold Glove in a number of All-Star awards. Kind of crazy that he didn't even win a Silver Slugger this last year when he hit over 300, over 30 homers, over 100 ribbies, led the league in on-base percentage, but in that 160 WRC plus. But first base is a stacked position offensively on most teams. So he'll be 38 by the fourth year of this contract. I guess the last pivot that we try to make in these negotiations with him is if you're going to insist on the 4-year contract with us. The one thing we haven't done with the guaranteed 4-year contract is pull out the no trade clause. And is that something that he would consider if he can still get the 4 years and the guaranteed $30 million a season? And he is willing to think about that. So that gives us a little bit more flexibility in potentially moving on from him if we need to. I would think it would be a situation where he's not performing the way that we expect him to, and we might have to eat some of that contract, but the fact that we can potentially bring him on board without having to include that no trade clause is probably about the best consolation and best compromise that we're going to get at this point. So 4 years, $120 million, no team options, no player options, but also no trade clause is the offer that we are going to submit to Twinkle Toes Rojas here at the beginning of 2040 free agency. And the calendar's flipped to December. Rojas has finally gotten back to us, says that right now we are the leaders. Seems like there might also be some interest from Milwaukee, the Mets, and Boston. However, taking a look at the rest of free agency as far as the batters are concerned, Sims is still out there, Anderson and Bentley are still out there, Mays is still out there. So our potential fallback options are all still available, but right now we are pot committed to potentially trying to bring Mr. Rojas on board to center our potential lineup for the next 3 or 4 years. And we have gotten Mr. Rojas signed. We're going to have to give up a 3rd-round draft pick because of it, but hopefully if we lose those other guys to big free agent contracts, we'll make it up with compensatory picks. The fans are thrilled by it. Big splash in free agency for Buffalo, and certainly think that Mr. Rojas will be the best bat that we've had in the middle of our lineup since we parted ways with Shamar Jenneret 4 years ago. Rojas, as we mentioned, coming off of the best season of his career, 160 WRC plus. He's averaged 135 over the course of his career. A 115 WRC plus as a 24-year-old rookie is the worst number that he's put up over the course of his career. He has pretty consistently been a well above average offensive player, and hopefully he will be our cleanup hitter for the next 4 seasons. A big commitment at $30 million a year for 4 years for a guy who's in his mid-30s. But the fact we were able to get that contract done and to not have to include the no trade clause when all was said and done makes me feel a little better about the fact that we had to go to 4 years rather than 3 years. As you saw through the negotiations, we tried getting the team options in there to every extent possible. We tried keeping it to 3 years. If we were going to get him signed, it was clear that we needed to go to 4. I don't think I would have been willing to go to 5. I hope I wouldn't have been. Maybe it's good that I never really got tested on that front. 4 years makes us stretch a little bit. He probably stretched a little bit because he wanted 5 years and more money. When all was said and done, we kind of met in the middle. And Mr. Rojas hopefully will be an important part of our lineup for the next several seasons as we try to get this team back to the World Series. And with us having put Rojas onto the 26-man roster, just kind of figured I would see the thought process behind our new manager and let him kind of put a lineup together for us. And there's a few things that I don't like. Josh Porter, the center fielder who we picked up a little over a year ago from Atlanta, had a solid year for us, a 119 WRC plus. He is not in the starting lineup. And interestingly, our young infielder, Alejandro Contreras, who we think has a lot of potential to be a pretty useful player, is also not in either of the starting lineups that our new manager, Brian Hickman, has proposed. So clearly we'll need to be tweaking things when all is said and done. See some pretty easy ways out of this. Would certainly be bumping Tegan Tiley from the lineup for Mr. Contreras, and would probably bump the youngster Ishmael Velasco from the starting lineup to ensure that Mr. Porter was back in there. But we will have some interesting decisions to make. I really think the rest of the offseason is going to be relatively quiet with the trade that we made of Estrada for Andrus and now the acquisition of Rojas. We've kind of rebuilt our infield a bit. We've got as holdovers Coma Duran, although our new manager has pivoted him to left field. Seifu, Tiley, and Contreras, in addition to Rojas and Andrus in the infield, and a whole bunch of pretty good outfielders to pick from. The only two who I'm confident are going to be on the team with 100% certainty are Juan Romero and Josh Porter. Other than that, I think we're going to have some incredible battles in spring training for those last 3 or 4 spots on the team as outfielder / first baseman / DHs. And the pitching staff, despite the loss of Estrada, kind of like what we've got. Barajas, Mendoza, Shazier, and Barbarito all back in the rotation. Our new manager would put in Espinoza, who we talked about. I do tend to think that Jim Lance, who is one of the top-rated prospects in our system and one of the top prospects in baseball, will likely be swapping with Espinoza as our 5th starter for this upcoming season. Probably will give the younger player, who's a more highly regarded prospect, the first opportunity in the rotation next year. But with Scott, Ruckel, Hainsworth, Farrell, Waters all back, feel like except for the last couple of spots in the bullpen potentially, there's not a lot of decisions to make left with this pitching staff. And honestly, there's not a ton else that we're going to do to this team offensively. If we could somehow sneak in a way to add a really big bat that could play second, third, or short with the limited funds that we've got available, would certainly think about that. I do think that we do have some money to save here. Yeah, we'll have to see the recommended draft slot amounts and how they change. I don't think that that hasn't run yet because of the winter meeting, so we don't know exactly where we're going to be picking yet, but we're probably not going to need to spend as much as we did a year ago, although theoretically some of those free agents on our team could sign with other teams soon, and maybe we would get the compensatory picks for this upcoming draft. Still a few days away from when they determine that. I can't remember whether it's the first day of the winter meetings or the last day of the winter meetings when they run the lottery for the top of the draft. So we'll probably sim through the end of the winter meetings and then conclude this episode. And at the beginning of our next episode, we'll be jumping into the Rule 5 draft, where maybe we add a pitcher or two that could help the back end of our rotation. Who knows, maybe there's a backup catcher or a interesting young infielder to take a flyer on. And then after that, it'll be deep into international amateur free agency, because I don't think with the big acquisition of Rojas made that we're going to be very active the rest of the way in free agency, at least at the top end of the market. And as the winter meetings ended today, our old buddy Andres Medina agreed to a $41.1 million 3-year offer from Texas. Medina, over the course of his career, as you probably saw there, 247 hitter with 92 homers and 2,500 at-bats, a bit below average in terms of his offensive production, but still has put up a 21.3 WAR over the course of his career by virtue of his excellent defensive ability behind the plate. Now that we are through the draft lottery, does look like that 5,400 number is about where we will be. Still have the opportunity for some compensatory picks if we do end up losing Anderson and or Meza, which I would certainly expect. And at this point, we want them to be signed to long and lucrative contracts to ensure that we get as much compensatory pick goodness in return for their departures. So the big move is done. We will find out how it plays out over the next few years, but feel like when all was said and done, pivoting away from Estrada in the rotation, given that we've got guys like Espinoza, Borgian, and most importantly Lance, who can jump right into the rotation, is not going to hurt us that much. And adding a bat like Rojas in the middle of our lineup will hopefully ensure that we are a bit more competitive offensively, particularly when facing the best pitchers in the league in October than we have been in recent seasons. And we're still a long way from seeing how all of that plays out in the regular season and hopefully the postseason. But we've made our big splash here in the early stages of the offseason and free agency. And as I said, we'll tackle the Rule 5 and international amateur free agency in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.